The first thing that the world knew about Christians was that they ate together. At the beginning of each week, the early Christians would get together, rich and poor, men and women, Jew and Gentile, slave or free, adult or children. They got together to celebrate the day that the world changed forever. The early Christians would eat, and they would say prayers, and they would sing some songs, and they would give thanks, which is the Greek word Eucharistio, where we get our word Eucharist, which we're going to have this morning. They gave thanks not only for the bread from the earth, but also for the bread from heaven, Jesus. Now, in our gospel, following Jesus, they found this grassy spot on the mountain side to rest. And Jesus, he panned the large crowd. And then he casually turned to Philip, who was playing Angry Birds on his phone at the time. Sam would like that if he was here. But he's in the children's room because he's an expert at Angry Birds. Philip glanced up at Jesus, and then he did a double take. And the Lord said to him, "How are we going to feed them?" Jesus wanted to hear what Philip would say. Philip panicked. Did you say something to me? What? Are you talking to me? Are you asking for Peter? He's over there. Where are we going to feed them? McDonald's? Costco's? Is the Salvation Army open? Andrew, his friend, stepped in and said, "There's a kid over here who has a couple of small fish and some bread, small pieces of barley bread." Has Andrew learned that a little is always a lot in Jesus' hands? A little water can make wine. A little mustard seed can grow into a big tree. A little faith can move that mountainous problem in your life. A little courage can get me through that difficult time. A little prayer can help me make a good decision. A little is always a lot in Jesus' hands. The boy gave Jesus his 2 little fish, and Jesus took them. And our gospel says he gave thanks. Eucharistio. And somehow it was more than enough to feed that big crowd. I have a friend back in Lexington who took his young son, to communion. And his son is just old enough now to start asking those questions, you know. And they went for the Eucharist, and they came back down and they sat in their seats, and the little boy asked his dad, "Dad, what did we just do?" And Dad answered, "Well, we just celebrated the Lord's Supper." "What's that? What's the Last Supper?" the boy asked. "Well, that was the meal Jesus shared with his disciples the night before they died." And the kid sighed and he said, "Boy, they sure didn't eat much, did they?" It's a little wafer. After Jesus ascended to heaven, you see, he could have given his followers a list of rules or some kind of conceptual truth to mull over. But what he did instead is not give them something to think about, but rather something concrete, something to do in a specific way, something that would go on teaching them what they needed to know when Jesus was no longer around them. "Do this," Jesus said, "in remembrance of me." And he's talking about communion. The Catechism in our Book of Common Prayer, which is that little red book, says that the Eucharist is for the forgiveness of sins, to strengthen our own union with Christ and with one another, and it's also to give us a foretaste of the heavenly banquet which is about to come. Page 859, I think it is. In the 2nd century, a custom arose in some communities to send a piece of the communion bread from the bishop's church to all the other churches in the area as a symbol of the unity of all believers. In the 4th century, when Constantine, we all know about him, made Christianity the state religion, the Eucharist became infused with much more pomp and imperial ceremony. Later, the church divided into the Greek East and the Roman West, carrying with them different theological understandings. By the Middle Ages, lay people took communion once a year because it was so private and special and holy, leaving the priests in charge of all the wine. Bad idea. Through the Reformation period, reformers quit emphasizing communion, and instead they made the sermon the center of their service. The sermon, which lasted about, an hour and a half. That's what I'm talking about, an hour and a half. Many rejected the Roman Catholic idea of transubstantiation. That's where the bread and the wine become the actual body and blood of Christ in that moment. And many others couldn't agree on the exact manner of Christ's presence in the sacrament at all. They didn't know, they couldn't figure it out. So all these different Christians, they did the Christian thing, and they started to kill each other. They killed each other, and they fought wars, and they burned books, and they burned a few people too, or just throw them on the fire too. And the people argued, and they smashed churches all over the Eucharistio, the idea of giving thanks. Now, at this point in history, I don't know about you, but I have to ask myself, I'm a little confused. Whose church is it? Whose church exactly is this that we're talking about? Is it our church, or is it Jesus' church? And today, when Christians bicker and they fight about who's right and who's wrong, and they put out little signs in their yard that say that you're not welcome, and they condemn people who aren't like themselves, I think again, now, whose church are they talking about? They're talking about their church, not Jesus' church, because Jesus received everybody. He loved everybody who came to him who was hungry and in need. Isn't that true? His church should do the same. Now, the bread symbolizes the body of Jesus, and the wine his blood. And in every tradition that I've learned about and read about and know about, someone at some point says, remember. Remember how God became one of us. Remember how God ate with us and drank with us and laughed with us and cried with us. Remember how he died for us. Remember that he rose again, promising that we would too someday, and promising us in the meantime that this eternal food would nourish us and sustain us on our journey. That is the Eucharist. And when we come forward to the altar in a little bit, and we raise our open hands, we are admitting that we don't have all the answers. We're admitting that I don't have all the power within me to do what I need to do. We're admitting that we don't have what it takes on our own. It is, as the saying goes, out of our hands. We need your grace. We need your forgiveness. It's not about me being right. It's about you being God. That is the Eucharist. Now, I can remember 3 meals that begin to express what the Eucharist is all about. The first meal, I don't know about how often your family gets together for family meals, but I'd certainly recommend it. The first meal was on Sundays after church, which was a big meal at my childhood home. I can picture the family table. It was this long table. And I can picture my Democratic brother on my left and my Republican brother-in-law on my right. And me in the middle, me with Nixon in the Vietnam War, right in the middle there. And sometimes the conversations would get so heated about who's right and who's wrong, and they'd get so worked up that my mom had to break it up with the wooden potato spoon that she took out of the yellow bowl. She'd say, knock it off. We're family. Let's eat. She wasn't Italian, but she used her hands a lot. The altar is an open table where we are all welcome, where we are all family. Even if we have differences, saint or sinner, old or young, any color, from any country, we are all welcome. For this is a kingdom not for the worthy, but a kingdom for the hungry. The second meal was a meal that when my friend's aunt died. My friend's aunt was healthy one day. Then she got the staph infection that spread to her spine. She was hospitalized, and a few days later she died. And everybody was shocked, and they gathered at my friend's aunt and uncle's house, and they're just shocked and surprised, and they're grieving, and they can't believe she's gone. And every few hours the doorbell would ring as another member of the Baptist church where they attended showed up with a casserole or a pie or some kind of a food, bread. Over those meals, they found the strength to cry that day and to share memories and to be together and to really mourn and to come to grips. That's the lady who served us communion at the church last Sunday, the uncle said, pointing to one of the Baptists in the doorway with a Tupperware bowl in her hand. And here she is, he said, serving it again. That is communion. It is a family meal, and it is a holy meal. It is sacred. Something happens there, and it feeds our spirits, and it feeds our emotional hunger, too. And thirdly, it is a love meal. It is a meal of love. Something happens between you and God at that meal, at that communion. One morning, I got up and I came downstairs, and Sam had gotten up before me. He's almost 6 now. We usually would get up together on Saturday mornings and we'd get our cereal and we'd go to the breakfast table and we'd eat and do stuff, But that particular morning, I guess it was about 3 years ago or so, making him about 3 or 4, Sam got up before me and he went downstairs. And I could later see by the trail what he had done. He went into the kitchen all by himself, and he pulled out the bottom drawer, then he climbed up that drawer, which he was not supposed to do, probably filled with all kinds of sharp knives and forks and stuff, and he used it as a step to get on. And then he opened the cupboard door, and he took out a bowl, then he slid across the counter, right past the sink that was in the middle, and he got some cereal out of the other cupboard. Then he slid back over, and he took the bowl and the cereal, and he got back down, and he walked over to the refrigerator. And he yanked the refrigerator door open, and then he pulled out the half-gallon carton of milk. The bowl's on the floor, and he poured the cereal into the bowl on the floor, still on the floor, and he spilled the milk all over the place and putting it in there. And then he got up, and he walked over to the table, and he slid it into my spot at the table, spilling more. And then he proudly stood there in his Buzz Lightyear pajamas, waiting for me with a smile on his face. Now, when I saw this, there may be a father somewhere who would have yelled at his son, pointing out the terrible mess that he made on the floor, but it's not this father. Instead, I knew that there was something much more important happening here, and I walked over to Sam, and I gave him a hug, and I said, thank you, son, because I realized he had given me a gift in that meal. And here's the point. How many times have I pictured God standing above me at the kitchen door saying, Rick, you put that bowl down. You clean up that mess. You get off that counter. You're not supposed to do that. I was beginning to see that God's not like that. I was beginning to see that as I stumble through life, like Sam did in that kitchen that morning, God loves me, and God loves you too. Spilled milk and all. Amen.